I'm really delighted to have this panel again. Students have been so instrumental. Christina Gutierrez, shout out to her, who's doing a 1 week take-home exam right now, so she can't come, unfortunately, but she was instrumental in helping us get this fabulous panel together, so I want to thank her. And we have, as a reminder, these Twitter hashtags. There's been a great online discussion going on during this conference as well, so we invite you to participate. So, as I mentioned, we have this initiative, RAP, Race, Arts, and Placemaking at USC, and so my wonderful colleagues here, Lanita's modeling our shirt, as well Taj Frazier at the other end are my two wonderful colleagues. And we've also been teaching a class, and I would say that the theme song for this year is Kendrick Lamar's Alright video, which has often been called the anthem of today. And also, I've heard it be associated with Black Lives Matter as well. So what we wanted to do is actually to play it. And so if you could cue that up, dim the lights. It's such a powerful piece, and I keep listening to it again and again. So let's experience art, like I said, we will.
My name is Lanita Jacobs, and together with Taj Frazier, towards the end, we are going to serve as the facilitators for this discussion, and we want it to be a conversation. So one of the things we want to do first is to ask the panelists to introduce themselves in this way. What is it, if anything, about, say, the video All Right, or the moment that brings us all together, the 1992 uprising rebellion, that has helped to define who they are and what they're doing today? And I'll just start briefly. I'm going to take 2 to 3 minutes, maybe all of us can. In 92, I was an undergraduate at UCLA, and I came from Oakland. That's one of the scenes that are just pictured in the All Right video. And when 92 happened, it was horrifying, probably more horrifying than the more recent election that we had. I couldn't understand how that video could have led to a acquittal of the officers, and that was my coming of age. It made me want to become an academic. At the time, I was very invested in trying to save the black male until I discovered intersectionality and my questions broadened. But in many ways, I would say that what happened in 1992 as an undergraduate at UCLA fueled my investments in research to try to understand racial inequality and increasingly turn my attention more towards the arts, particularly stand-up comedy. I teach in anthropology and American studies at USC, and my research looks at notions of authenticity in Black stand-up comedy from 9/11 to Obama, as well as other subjects. E.Moncell.
Hello, can you guys hear me? E.Moncell Durden. I teach over at Kaufman School of Dance for USC. And 92, I was heavily immersed as a dancer, really in the clubs. And when the riots happened, we were talking earlier, the first thing I thought about was 65 riots in Watts. I'm not from California, I'm from Philadelphia. So there was some distance in how it impacted me in a certain way. But being black, it definitely impacted me. And just the idea of what, again, my feelings going back to the 65 riots, and particularly Watt stacks that happened in the Coliseum as a celebration of that riot. Just thinking about the involvement of music in our everyday lives and who are the artists speaking to whatever's going on socially, politically. And I would think about what music was coming out at that time, not just for celebratory reasons, but to kind of speak up against the atrocities that were happening. And this kind of plays out a little bit of that idea in it. But I want to be, in both instances, 92 and 65, I want to be more than all right. All right, satisfactory. But I guess as a song, you can't say, I'm exquisite. It doesn't work. But, so I get the young man. But yeah, we're going to be more than all right.
All right. All right, how y'all doing today? All right, my name is Anthony Ratcliff. I'm an assistant. I should have been let me talk. Right. That's a whole other story. Assistant professor at Cal State Los Angeles. 92, I wasn't even born yet. Nah, I'm just playing. I was actually an undergrad as well, and I remember the day very clearly. I went to school in the Bay Area at Cal State Hayward. It's now called Cal State East Bay. And then on that day, I was at an X-Clan concert. X-Clan is like an old school, Afrocentric, black nationalist, military hip hop group. And we were in the concert at the time at San Francisco State. Everybody was having a good time listening to Brother Jay, and if y'all know X-Clan, they was rocking it out. And all of a sudden they stopped in the middle of the song and said, "Them mother effing white cops just got off." And everybody in the concert was like, "What?" And they literally stopped the show and we started marching. They took the mic and went out. We went down the street at San Francisco State, walked all the way from San Francisco State to downtown San Francisco, which is a long ass walk. But through at the time, this is when the Fillmore district was still an all black area, right? 92. Folks came out, and the march went from like probably 500 people that left from San Francisco State to about a couple thousand, and went downtown. And actually in downtown San Francisco, folks started looting, actually tearing stuff up, rebelling, right? And so it was a really important moment for me because it showed me that the music they were talking about, the ideas that they were putting out there about black empowerment, they actually wanted to express that, right? And I feel like the people in the show, we didn't really know what else to do at that moment. Everybody was so upset about what happened, but to me it was an empowering moment, right? And I know that people can quibble about, destroying property and stuff, but it was just the rage of years of these things happening. And San Francisco, Oakland, every place has a Rodney King. And so I think that's really something that inspired me. And so from that point forward, hip hop has always been something that I utilize as kind of the language I speak through, but I realize that hip hop does have the ability to mobilize people and to move people. And so that really sticks with me till today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Melina Abdullah, and I teach at Cal State LA in Pan-African Studies with Anthony. So 92, I was a teenager. I guess you're the only one not in our generation.
I was in middle school.
Hey,
So I was a teenager, and but I'm from Oakland. I didn't know you were from Oakland, though, Lanita. So in Oakland, there's this, if you were born in Oakland in the 70s, and I'm admitting I was born in the 70s, but I'm still 29, there's a consciousness of the city, right, that you just have. You just are born into consciousness if you were of that generation and from Oakland. So there was this kind of revolutionary spirit, because we're the Panther Cub generation, right? People like to say the hip hop generation, that too, but really in Oakland, we're the Panther Cub generation. All of our parents were in and around black revolutionary movements, and we inherited that, right? And so we spent our entire childhoods kind of waiting on the revolution, right? So there's a term, ready for the revolution, like waiting on the revolution. So I remember some of my friends and me waiting on the revolution, and I remember when 92 hit, we saw what was happening in Los Angeles, and we saw the looting happening in Los Angeles, and we understood that to be an uprising. And I heard some language earlier that really bothers me. So when people refer to 92 as riots, I think it's really disrespectful. I think it prioritizes the kind of keeping in place of the existing hegemony, right? So you are saying that what the system has done to us as black people, as working class people, as brown people is okay, and anything that we do in response to it is irrational. So these were not riots. These were uprisings. This was a revolt. This was a rebellion. This was not a riot, right? So this is not a bunch of white kids after a soccer game tipping over cars, okay? So I think it's really important that we watch our language. So the 92 uprising, for me, we had been waiting on this revolution, and there was no clear way of how we could get power, but looting in some ways was kind of a way of getting power, a way of literally grabbing back what had been stolen from us. So I remember waiting for it to hit my city, which didn't happen, and really kind of hoping that something exploded that was more. The one thing that I want to lift up is it encouraged me to kind of step into a place that I'm now in. So I'm one of the organizers along with Anthony. We're both members of Black Lives Matter. one of the original members of Black Lives Matter, and I remember kind of waiting on the revolution and kind of waiting to be a revolutionary, I guess, in that. And there was this image of Maxine Waters. So she became really outspoken and all over media. And I remember seeing her and going, I want to be just like that, right? And so for me, 92 really lifted up a contemporary example of a Black woman revolutionary who I could emulate. Even though she was an elected official, I saw her as tied to community and revolutionary and somebody who was unapologetic. Now we say unapologetic Blackness, and somebody who I could emulate.
Hi, I'm Taj Frazier, faculty in the Annenberg School for Communication and affiliate faculty in American Studies and Ethnicity. As mentioned, yeah, I'm the young buck, I guess, of the panel. So I was in middle school in 92, and I remember, you know, when the uprising began, I remember watching it on the news with my mother. I grew up on the East Coast, primarily in New York and Harlem, and in Newark, New Jersey. So the shadow of rebellion and uprising, you know, surrounded me throughout my upbringing. You know, if you've ever been to Newark, you know that the main things that people blame when talking about, you know, deprivation, talking about city neglect, it was either Sharp James, who's the mayor, or the lack of response to the uprising of '67, right? In New York, it was '64, right? And the blackout of the late '70s, all of which were, as Dr. Abdullah explained, responses to neglect, responses to inhumane treatment, lack of quality health care, education, schools, brutality by the carceral state, right? So I remember being, you know, in middle school, and that was the conversation my mother and I had, you know, watching everything transpire. So there was never any kind of conversation about this as a riot. To some degree, my mother was early educating me in terms of critical media literacy, right? She was saying, what they're saying on the news, that's not what it is, son.
Right.
So know that, right? And one of the things for me that became a resource in terms of understanding the energy, the anger, the vibrations that were emerging over the course of those days came through music and the arts and representation, right? So the first time I actually heard and learned Latasha Harlan's name was through a Tupac video, Keep Your Head Up. Right? It wasn't as if they were talking about her name on the news or in my classroom spaces, right? It was through artists who were saying, look, know her name, say her name, right? In the 90s, right? And so one of the things I'm particularly interested in, and I have paid attention to since that point, is how certain kinds of urban spaces, especially like Los Angeles, have been hubs for creative vibrations, especially before we see this anger take shape via uprisings, right? So the fact that you have somebody like Atati T who's talking about the battering ram, right? The fact that you have Ice Cube, who if you listen to Death Certificate is predicting like what's to come, right? But the fact that you also have artists who have been to some degree offering alternative kind of imaginaries of the future, right? So post 65, Noah Purifoy, Betty Saar, all these artists who are responding to what happened and using it as an opportunity to rebuild in ways that don't fall into the kind of narrative of development that we see shaping areas like this right now, right? And so I'm particularly interested in us having a conversation too about thinking about what role are the arts, creativity, imagination playing in terms of challenging the racialization of Black and brown bodies throughout, you know, the country and the world. And so I wanted to follow up with our panelists to talk about, like, what is it do you think about Los Angeles, Oakland? I mean, especially when we see this kind of video, right, where it's taking place in places like Oakland, Los Angeles. What is it about the racial histories, the histories of class, of migration, of artistry, performance, public space, that is shaping some of the kind of creative responses that we're seeing emerge in the city right now, and beyond the city as well?
Are you starting with anybody in particular?
Well, I can. I mean, some of the folks who I've worked with since moving to LA, I mean, so I've worked with crump dancers and street dancers in Los Angeles. And to me, crump is like, you know, children of 92. So children who are, you know, crump is a style of performance that emerges out of various neighborhoods in South Central Los Angeles, Watts. Starts initially among I don't know if you guys have ever seen like Rise or any of the other documentaries that have come thereafter, but young people who basically are trying to find spaces to cultivate community and expression, right? And many of whom are lacking formal spaces. So what do? They appropriate public space and create spaces to perform, to dance, to mobilize themselves as a result of, citywide neglect, police brutality, right? So that's kind of one instance that I can think of, within the context of the 90s and thereafter. I think, Kendrick Lamar is another product of 92.
Right.
And even when we think about even this image that's behind us, right? One of my mother's biggest fears for me as a child was, number one, walking in the streets on my own, and then once I got of age to drive a car. And it wasn't about me getting into car accidents, it was about these kinds of figures surrounding the car, and the kinds of exchanges that would potentially emerge, So I'm just wondering, this is kind of an interesting kind of way of positioning that via imagery. But I'm also interested in terms of some of our panelists, in terms of especially, Professor Durden, in terms of talking about dance and movement, and how do we think about movement within all of this?
It's interesting that I don't think he had anybody crumping in the video. I don't remember seeing anybody particularly crumping. Most of the images of dancers or dancing that I saw was either of waving, which is very fluid, like it's water. It's, you can't block it. It's going to figure a way around. So then that idea of being all right is like, we're going to figure this out. But then the other images of dances is bone breaking. Yeah. And that could be saying a number of different things, just the idea of what the positionality of the movement is. And this idea of being called bone breaking and breaking of spirits or breaking of ideas or breaking of lines or taking back that, being broke or breaking something else. I'm curious as to, was there a purpose that he only had that kind of movement?
Yeah.
What he might have been thinking, or maybe not. But just in taking ownership of whatever space you're in as a dancer, I have a really dear friend of mine named B-Boy Ivan, AKA Action Figure, who made up this word called respectinize, which I'm sure somebody else has said it, but it's really his niche. And it's just thinking about the word respectinize as we break it down, read to view it again, spec of spectacle, cognize to rethink. So rethinking the images or the people that you see in the space that they're in. And for those that do bone breaking, particularly in New York, and I don't know if they had the same thing out here, but in New York, you would see bone breakers in like the subway stations with gas masks on, shirtless. And they knew, like, if I had a shirt on and a gas mask, this is going to cause problems. Right. So that idea of needing to make somebody else feel safe about what they're doing because you can't see past, this mask, this literal mask they have on. But just what that is and how you claim the space that you're in and what that says for you, and through them to respect what they're doing, the reflection of who they are in their community, the intentions behind the movement, and the construction of the ideas that help fulfill that movement. I think he's doing an excellent job in here and pushing that forth. And another thing about Kendrick is he reintroduces stuff that we've seen in the 80s.
Right.
Where I've had students who, when they think of a hip-hop music video, all they think of is strippers or somebody in a thong or shaking whatever. And then I had to show them a whole bunch of 80s videos, and it was like, you don't see a lot of that, especially in the Northeast Coast. But just reclaiming of that, and then the ideas, the conversations that they have about themselves, and then what the dancing might mean, or how that changes how they see themselves in these spaces. But it's always a moment to say, this is who I am. And through the migration of these gestures, we get it. We instantly connect to the familiarities, again, of that reflection and the intentions behind it. Hopefully reaching out in a way where others start to see what that is, maybe penetrate them mentally to recognize. So it's a lot of layers, but I'm really interested to know if he chose that kind of movement for a particular reason, or why he didn't have crumping in it, because normally crumping people see it and they think it's about aggression.
Right,
And
right.
it's from my understanding and conversations I've had with Little C, it's not about aggression. And one of the acronyms is King's Radically Uplifting Mighty Praise. So they're already not about being aggressive,
Right.
but about releasing that pent up frustrations in a way that is becomes spiritual for them. I don't know if that directly answered your question, but that was on my mind.
I mean, I think thinking about the response, like Black culture has always responded to the sort of the social and the historical moment that Black people are in. Going back to the after the Watts rebellions, you have all these different cultural groups come out in Watts in different parts of the country. Really, the Black arts movement comes out of that time period. And so I think it's important that we see that. And so hip hop itself is responding as well to these different moments. And the thing about 92 that's really interesting is that there was so much hip hop prior to that moment that was already sort of creating the possibility of people being conscientious and creating conscientious art. And that's my time period really when I think of myself as really coming into consciousness and everything. So it was just the norm, right? Artists, so many different groups were out there that were doing politically conscious music that was really about upliftment, about raising consciousness. All the songs that were kind of critical of the police, even before Rodney King happened. And so it was just sort of the norm. And I think that as we move forward to today, it's a lot less normal, right? And I think that's why I think Kendrick Lamar gets so much praise, because he's doing something that a lot of people aren't doing. He is very rare. We can identify other artists that are out today, people like J. Cole, who's made certain songs about the Black Lives Matter moment, if you will. But by and large, most hip hop isn't really responding to what's happening. And I think there's a lot of discussion why that is, right? We see the commodification of hip hop, the fact that in 92, you had commodification, but it wasn't at the level it is today. And I think that's one of the shortcomings is that there's not enough sort of independent art, at least that most people can tap into, where we can see people actually really responding to what's going on today. And I think that's something that I talk to my students about it sometimes, and they might connect to these songs in certain ways, but they're a lot more interested in people like Kodak Black or Lil Yachty and these other people, and I'm like, what are they saying? Young Thug. Young Thug might do certain things where he's kind of questioning the role of gender, and I'll respect Young Thug for that because he is kind of pushing back on the idea that gender is this very sort of narrow thing. But a lot of the other mainstream artists, they're not really saying anything. So when Kendrick comes out, he's just exalted, and I said this earlier, because he's one of the few people that actually is doing this kind of work. And I think that's something that has been historically important, and I wish there was more of it today. And well, let me not say that, there is, and I think that's one thing I try to do is I try to show my students, like, there are people like Tef Poe, who's from the Ferguson area, who did a lot of stuff about what went on with Mike Brown. And I think there are people out there, but the problem is that the media, the corporate media and the corporatization of music is so strong, it's difficult for those things to get out there. But I will say again that culture has traditionally responded to what was going on socioeconomically within black spaces. And so I think that there is an importance to it. The sadness is we don't have enough of it. I think there should be 1,001 songs going on about what's happening today. And when you hear one, you sort of like, at least for me, when I hear it, I get so happy. But my students are really connected to the music in that same way. But I hope we can get back to a time where the music is very responsive and very vocal and very critical of the sort of socioeconomic, political, racial state that we're in. And that's something I'm looking forward to.
So I agree with everything that's been said, and I'm going to just tweak a couple of things, if that's okay. First, what I'd like to say about the role of art in resistance especially, is that especially for Black working class people, there's so much that's on us, right? That it becomes overwhelming and heavy, and it is often, it can be burdensome, right? And so having to constantly resist in very clear ways can also be heavy, right? So if you think about, so I'm the least artistic person on this panel, I'm sure. No, you beatbox.
Oh.
Yeah. So I have no artistic ability at all, right? But I need art, right? And so when we think about the resistance movement, what happens a lot of times is when we're kind of feeling the heaviness of these moments, when we feel the heaviness of the kind of weight of the entire state upon us, right? We're forced to summon as much power and strength as we can to speak out against it. So I mentioned like Maxine Waters' kind of resistance. That's a very difficult load to bear. And in order to kind of survive it and also keep some semblance of sanity, right, you have to figure out another way of connecting. And for me, what art does, as someone who kind of came of age with hip hop, right? I am part of that hip hop generation. I remember when rap music came out, like the first rap song I ever heard, I think I was in like the 3rd grade or something, right? And I was like, man, this is something. Or remember when Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5 came out?
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And so, you know, I was younger than that when that came out, right? And I remember thinking like, it was a way of voicing the burden that we were feeling, but without the heaviness of it, right? Like, art has a way of speaking directly through your soul or to your soul, right? And kind of bypassing all of this stuff that can be too heavy sometimes. You need a break from, you need a release from sometimes. And so for me, that's what art does. And so when you started talking about hip hop as being kind of a response to the space that we live in and kind of the weight of the oppression that we live under, I think that's true. It is a response, and it's more than a response. There's kind of, who is that who said that if she didn't write it, might have been Alice Walker. If she didn't write it, would be like a baby that never was birthed, right? Was that Alice Walker? I think it was Alice Walker that said that, right? And so this idea that we're all pregnant, right? You're going to look it up? I saw him grab his phone. He's going to look it up, right?
Thank God.
So, you know, we're all pregnant with this voice that needs to be released, right? And we can either release it through these very kind of heavy ways, or we can have art is almost like a doula, right? Like it's helping us to birth that voice that needs to come out, right? Either through you or through someone else, right? Helping to birth that out of you, in a way that it has to be released. You can't be pregnant forever, right? Or you'll die, right? Like, Anyway, so I think too, and this is the last thing, with people like Kendrick, in our generation, there were lots of people like Kendrick's, and in this album, he's talking to Pac, right? Like, I remember you was conflicted, right? He's talking to Pac, so there were lots of folks in our generation who represented the conflict and contradictions of being conscious and also weighted down and affected by, you know, exploitative systems, right? There were lots of voices like that, but now with the corporate takeover of hip hop, it's less present. However, I feel like, and maybe this is my own bias, there's a thirst for it. Like, people don't really want the bullshit that they hear, right? What did Elijah Muhammad say? If you have a clean glass of water and a dirty glass of water, you'll drink the dirty glass if that's all there is, but if there's a clean glass next to it, you're gonna drink the clean water, right? And I think that there's a thirst for the clean water. Kendrick represents some of that, and there's more of that that's coming. I know that I'm hella happy that, what was that fool's name, Ed Sheehan? What's the Shape of You got knocked off the billboard by Kendrick? Thank you. If he did nothing else with this new album, right, at least he knocked his ass off the off the billboard. Nobody hummed that song. It's a horrible song, right?
Thank you so much, Melina. And you actually provide a wonderful segue to, I'm wondering about time, because we want to allow time for Q&A, right? I'm looking at you, Annette. Yes. So this is going to be a quick question to all the panelists before we do that. Does that sound right? Just feels like time has gone by so quickly.
Damn.
In my opinion.
Yeah, I'm gonna shut up.
We have till 10. We have till 3:45. We do. So we have time. But we want Q&A too. But we do want Q&A. Okay. So here's my quick question to everybody. I'm about to go a different way, Taj.
Cool.
Okay. There's a moment for me in this video where it's this moment, right? And Kendrick is declaring what his greatness is going to be. And he starts to move, and then that groove becomes contagious. And the brothers in the car also do that with him. And it gets me thinking to all the panelists about the redemptive power of a shared or a collective groove, right? And how so much of, at least Black popular culture relies on a kind of, any popular culture, I guess, relies on a certain kind of shared take-up of a certain kind of groove. For me, in stand-up comedy, that possibility is the moment where a comic says, "Hi, everybody," and you just hear the hum of the microphone, and it's just such a space of possibility, and I revel in that particular moment. And I'm looking at you, I'm looking at you, Anthony, I'm looking at you, Melina, I'm looking at you, Taj, and I'm wondering, what is it about, you almost in some ways really riffed on this, but what is it about specifically what it is you do or how you delight in and how you practice art that takes part in this kind of, or makes possible a kind of shared and collective group? How do you do that? And when do you see the space of possibility there? How have you seen it in your own work? I don't know if you want to take that up in any way possible.
For me, and I'm gonna kind of tag on it, I'm gonna backtrack and tag on the end of the last part, but couple years ago, I would say like 3 or 4 years ago, I created I'm a dancer, if I didn't say that before. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I created an acronym for DANCE, which is discovering the autobiographical self, negotiating creativity and expression. We are always in discovery of our autobiographical story, and we're negotiating our bodies, our minds, our ideas. The creativity is the production of those ideas. The expression is the vulnerability to share with ourselves and others our emotions. And for me, it's the emotionality of music that takes me in a particular direction. And we think about emotion, E equal energy, M-O means ephemeral, T-I-O-N means action. So the energy behind our short-lived actions and what that says. We're not always angry, we're not always happy, we're not always sad. So we go through these frequencies, and for Kendrick to go in to this type of movement, he's tapping into a frequency that is felt and shared, and it brings us in, even without the music playing, because music send us on another journey, but even without the music, if somebody starts doing this, you just tap into whatever that is, right? If somebody starts laughing, you start laughing. And so he's consciously, unconsciously preparing us for this ride, and wants us to feel what's going on, and instinctively knows, like, this is how you get this. Everybody's going to react to this. This gets them in the car with me and ready to go on whatever this journey is, and then you pan out and see what the journey is, which is an interesting way to just to bring you in. But again, for me, it's having that connection, that, as Sabela would say, that immaterial material that brings us into that journey, and having something physical that just automatically connects with us.
I think for me, the idea of the shared groove, in the video, like in addition to that moment, also when Kendrick is in the car with the young boy, there's a young boy in the video, and he's in the car, and they're doing the donuts and, the sideshow. That's very Oakland, right? And they're throwing out money like that. And there's a moment where there's a police car chasing them, and they're throwing out money, right? And that reminds me of a time where there's a police chase in LA, and the folks was riding through South Central, and they were throwing out money, and everybody was like, yeah, and it was like this kind of groove they were sharing, and they were cheering on the sort of illegality of it all. But they just wanted them to be able to get free. And I think that the same sort of thing, like for me, the moment when the rebellion kicked off in 92, and we're at this concert, and everybody was dancing and grooving, and when the rebellion, there was kind of a somber feel, but there was still a sense of a shared groove as we went out and marched in the streets. And the same thing I feel in Black Lives Matter, after when Mike Brown, when Darren Wilson was let off, and Mike Brown was, dead and there was no justice, and folks met up in Lamert, and we marched. It's the same sort of groove in that sort of movement. And it's really, I think for me, it's like the autonomy of it. There's no kind of authority saying go out and do this. It's the people themselves getting together and really pushing the boundaries of what is legal and what's not legal, really, and trying to push forward and trying to make change. And I feel like that's an important important thing that's shown in the video. Like, I feel like the whole thing is they're all kind of grooving throughout the whole video against like imminent doom, and the police are kind of around, you know, and you feel like there's something gonna happen, and finally at the end you see Kendrick does get shot down, but there's still this groove that they're all feeling. And so for me, I'm really kind of like uplifted by that. And I know a lot of people aren't, and there's a lot of people that get scared of that. They don't like when you see a bunch of black folks like kind of getting loud and moving out in the streets and stuff like that. But for me, there's a sense of liberty and freedom in that, you know? So I'm really kind of uplifted by that. And I see it throughout the video, but I feel it when I'm out and marching. And, you know, there's something to that I think is very cathartic. And, you know, I really appreciate those times, and I'll let that go.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, I love that term, shared groove. Like, that's exactly it. And I know that there was going to be space. I don't know if there will be, but I'm going to bring it in now, which is the role of this song in the movement, right?
Yes.
So this idea and this practice that Anthony's underscoring of a shared groove, right? Like, this work can be super heavy, right? So we often talk about like the Black Lives Matter moment in the Black liberation movement as being just a social justice or racial justice effort. But if we're specific about what it is we're dealing with dead Black bodies, right? And so to do that can be extremely heavy and depressing, and we cry a lot. And the way, again, I keep saying some semblance of sanity, the way that we keep some semblance of sanity is, I think, this shared groove, right? So the use of all right, and we also use King Kunta, which is not talked about, but when we were doing marches for Nephi Adegin, who was killed in Cerritos, right? That's what we were using because King Kunta dropped first, right? All right, we used in Cleveland and have been using regularly. And, you know, now the whole album, right? Damn, we're going to use that whole thing, right? But this notion of, you know, we have to kind of tap into that spirit, right? We have to recognize this not just as a social justice and a racial justice movement, but also a spiritual movement. One of our students helps us do that, Shamel Bell, who does our, she leads our arts and culture team. And every demonstration that we're at, I know you're friends with Shamel as well, every demonstration that she's at, you know, she's like, okay, so now we're going to learn this move, right? And we do street dance activism, and I always think as somebody who's not artistic, this is stupid. Why are we wasting our time on this? And then I start doing it, and it's this opening. It's this opening of our souls and our spirits, and remembering that, you know, liberation is going to happen. It feels heavy now, but liberation is going to happen, and we're claiming our own liberation by engaging in the shared groove, like Anthony said.
Thank you.
Shared groove, I mean, what more can be said? For me, shared groove, and especially as an artist, as an MC, as a writer, shared groove speaks to both the ability to find with others and with yourself everything that's been described, especially that kind of feeling. Oftentimes I tell students, like, when you think about where do you feel free, where do you feel, where you lose sense of time and space, where you're not wondering, when do I get out of here or when did this end? You know, where you're not even counting who I'm with, but you're just with them, right? In the video, you see different kinds of moments of this, whether it be in the vehicle right now. To me, one of the best images is of Kendrick flying through the sky, right? So this kind of sense of the ability to take flight, right? And so to me, that's what really art is and art allows for. You know, I often try to push against and work against the kind of notion of art, you know, only certain folks are artists. You have to have certain kinds of talents to be art. I mean, my grandmother was an artist, and she made art in a variety of ways, via food, via community, via sound, via nurture, right? So that's how I always came to understand art, that art wasn't simply about the ability to do something and produce something for yourself, but to produce something in dialogue, in community, in fellowship with others, right? And to me, that's what some of the best art it does, right? It produces these kinds of moments where we lose a sense of time, space, and where we're able to imagine or engage with real kinds of trauma, pain, right? Art does what data cannot do.
Right.
You know, and I think we need to really spend time digging into the kinds of messages, meanings, values that are being communicated via expression And really more creative cultural workers need to be in the spaces where oftentimes, the folks who specialize in data are given priority and privilege, right? So for me, that's the kind of groove that I like to be immersed within and among, and that I think emerges via different kinds of forms of expression and creative practice. So I guess we have to
add one quick thing. I think that you're hitting on, Taj, is this black art.
Yeah.
Also requires the collective process,
Very
right?
much so.
So black art is not about some solo artist in a studio painting some beautiful thing that, somebody's gonna buy and put it in their home, right? Black art is about, and this is what we see in the video, but this is also the practice of hip hop, this is a practice of comedy, this is the practice of dance, right? Black art is about all of us kind of creating together, even those of us, so thank you for giving me permission, even those of us who say that we're not artistic, right? To engage in the process and then benefit from, it's almost like, what's that goes around? Like,
spiral.
Is that
A spiral.
But like, I'm thinking like a typhoon, like that's not a typhoon, what is that? It's a cyclone, like a cyclone, like it circles like this, right? And it becomes its own thing, but we're all wrapped up in it and all contributing to it, right?
And what's within it, the histories that we bring with us, the
Right.
voices who speak through us. I mean, you think about, that's what Tupac says too on the album, right? He said, what is hip hop but our dead homies talking through us?
For sure.
Right?
Right.
Art.
Yeah.
What do we see in the images? I mean, and that's what artists potentially allow for. Not their own stories that come through the image, but like what stories do we find within the image that's been encased on a wall or the movement that we see on a stage? What emotions does it bring to the fore that we've been trying to conceal and hide, but it reveals it, right? Okay, I know it's time. I know we have to make time.
Looks like we've got about 7 minutes for questions, so maybe 2 quick questions.
Really enjoying this panel. I just have a question as far as selecting Kendrick to represent the forms of resistance. What role do you guys see other rappers in a form of resistance, just not maybe as blatant or as overt? I'm thinking more of like Migos and people like those who should represent some form of resistance. What are you guys' thoughts on sort of on the other spectrum of hip hop and resistance?
So Kendrick's definitely not by himself. I don't know who has a T.I. album, but I love that like.
That's a great album.
Yeah, y'all
Great
got
album.
yeah. T.I. I mean, we can think about T.I., but we can also think about artists that we don't normally talk about, like Ty Dolla $ign, right? Who's talking about how to. So there's this phenomenal book. Richard Iton's book, right, In Search of the Black Fantastic, that talks about how black artists use their positions in 3 ways to really give life to black resistance movements. So they can, speak through their art, right? They can spend their dollars, right, to support the movement, and they can also be immersed in the movement. So I'm thinking about how, like, people like Ty Dolla $ign, who people don't normally think of, is using his resource and using his platform to speak to the prison industrial complex, right? Nipsey Hussle, right? We can think about how different folks who we don't think of as conscious, FDT for sure, right? Who we don't normally think of as having a voice like Kendrick or even a J. Cole, are also using their artistry, their platform, and their dollars to support the resistance movement.
I guess for me, I would just say, like, what are we claiming resistance? Like, are we just saying going against the grain, or are we saying really trying to liberate? Like, for me, I'm more interested in the liberation. I know people could talk about resistance in other ways, but like, I want to know, are you saying something that's trying to free people? Or are you saying something that's trying to, get your pockets fat? You might be edgy, but are you really trying to resist? Like, what are you resisting? So I think T.I. to me, I would say, someone like Joey Badass is a younger person from New York that's saying a lot of stuff on his most recent album. We talk about just Surrey X, who's making not only, and for me, it doesn't have to always be
and
very
immersed in the movement.
Very immersed in the movement. And they're actually out there in the streets and they're trying to use their any kind of profile they have to move people. Like, that's kind of what I'm interested in as resistance, but I know that's not the only form. And I don't want to say that, like I said, Kodak Black, I'm not saying he's not resisting, but I don't know if he's really trying to get other people free besides the people in his circle. And that's kind of where I kind of draw the line as far as what I define as resistance. But that's, that's my opinion, and you can argue with me and disagree, but that's kind of where I stand with this.
I just kind of go with what you guys just said, like the artists that you guys named. I don't personally can't think of anybody else that you haven't covered that speaks to the question.
Right.
Yeah.
I can't let this conversation go without saying this. Late at night on National Public Radio, I hear the revolution will not be televised. You have a comment on that, which is probably about 50 years old.
You heard that recently?
The point is, you don't hear that on your. You only hear it on National Public Radio late at night, KCRW. Late at night, you hear Gil Scott-Heron talking about. For those who don't know, the revolution will not be televised. What are your comments about that?
Yeah, I'll start. So Gil shows up on my playlist for this book that I'm writing, which looks at notions of authenticity in Black stand-up comedy outside of the normal way we typically talk about it, which is how do Black comics construct notions of racial authenticity because race is a social construction. I say, sure, that's fine. I'm an anthropologist. I'm with that. However, I'm also in a space post-Trump where I'm really hearing Melina when she talks about unapologetic Blackness. And I'm much more interested in talking about what is decidedly Black about Black culture or Black stand-up comedy. And it just makes me write in a very different way. It makes me teach and think in a different kind of way. So, we've got 2 minutes. So Gil speaks to me in that regard. And as far as the revolution will not be televised, in part, one of the reasons why we chose Kendrick is people are amassing playlists to prepare them for what may be coming up the pike. And Taj, you spoke about some of the songs where some of our artists were predicting a 92, right? And I do think that we're in a particular moment where something is fomenting and people are amassing their anthems and they're amassing their playlists because we want to be ready when the revolution comes. So
and I think somebody would probably make a song to add, to build on Gil, to say the revolution won't be digitized. So it's not going to happen through social media. While these things can be tools and resources, you inevitably need people to assemble. You need people to build in the communities where they live and to know their neighbors and to get to know the socioeconomic conditions that are shaping those communities, maybe in their favor, but potentially also not in their interest. So I think, that serves as a kind of good kind of closing point to thinking also too about like what can art and media do, but what can't they do?
Exactly. Oh, but maybe there's room for just one quick comment.
Yeah, I just can't stop thinking of Ralph Nader, Unsafe at Any Speed. This is the Corvair, the infamous Corvair that made Ralph Nader a public figure, a millionaire, I'm sure. This was a car that rolled over, and I don't know how many people were killed in the early 60s. And I just kept thinking, African Americans or Chicanos or Latinos aren't safe at any speed. Basically, and that's the famous book that made Ralph Nader a rich person.
Damn. Well,
Absolutely.
He could be
So we are going to wrap it up, and we thank you all for participating in this conversation.